Your Sage or Breville was working perfectly. Then it asked you to descale. You followed the instructions, you drained the boilers, you completed the process, and now, when you switch the machine on, the temperature climbs. 65 degrees, 68, 70, maybe 72, and then it just stops. The machine never becomes ready. You can't make coffee, you can't steam milk. So what actually happened? Did the descale damage your machine, or did it expose a problem that was already there? Because there is one point during the descale process where the machine has to make a very important decision, based entirely on information it cannot physically verify. And if that information is wrong, the consequences can be expensive. Let's start with the descale itself. On the Oracle, Oracle Touch, and dual boiler, part of the procedure involves opening the descale drain valves. When you do that, water leaves the boilers and runs into the drip tray. Inside the steam boiler, the water level begins to fall, lower and lower, until the boiler is almost empty. And now the machine needs to know something very important. Is there still water inside? It can't see the water. It doesn't use a mechanical float. Instead, it relies on these water level probes. The principle is actually very simple. A metal probe extends down into the boiler and is electrically isolated from the metal boiler body. When water touches the probe, the water creates an electrical path between the probe and the boiler. The electronics read wet. When the water level drops below the probe, that electrical path should disappear. The electronics read dry. That's basically it. But there's one weakness in this system. The machine doesn't actually know whether the probe is touching water. It only knows what the electrical signal tells it. After years inside a steam boiler, these probes are exposed to heat, steam, condensation, and minerals. Deposits and contamination can build up around the probe and its insulating surface. You don't need a complete short circuit. You only need enough electrical leakage for the electronics to interpret the signal incorrectly. So now you can have a probe that is physically dry, while electrically, the machine still sees wet. And under normal use, you may never notice, because most of the time there really is water inside the boiler. The fault stays hidden. But then you descale the machine, and suddenly, that hidden fault matters. The boiler is drained. The water level falls below the probes. A healthy probe should change from wet to dry. The machine now knows the water is gone. But if an aging or contaminated probe continues to report wet, the physical reality and the electronic signal no longer agree. The boiler can be empty, while the machine believes there is still water inside. And during descaling, conductive liquid and residue around the probe can make that false signal even more significant. Now, there are several water level probes inside the steam boiler, and they don't all have the same job. One is involved in controlling the fill level. If that signal is wrong, the machine may believe the boiler has enough water before it actually does. But that's not the probe I'm most concerned about. These three probes do not all have the same job. The short probe is the high-level fill probe. When the water falls below it, the machine calls for a refill. When water reaches it again, the refill pump stops. One of the long probes is the low-level safety probe. Its signal tells the machine whether the heating element is allowed to switch on. And that's where a small sensor fault becomes an expensive failure. Normally, the water absorbs that heat. Without enough water, the temperature around the heating element rises extremely quickly, and eventually, the protection system has to do its job. The thermal fuse can open, and once that happens, the steam boiler stops heating. Now we can finally explain the symptom from the beginning. Why does the display climb to around 68, 70, maybe 72 degrees, and then just stay there? Because the brew boiler is still heating, but the steam boiler isn't. The machine is waiting for the complete heating system to reach operating temperature. One part gets there, the other never does. So the machine sits around 70 degrees and never becomes ready. No espresso, no steam. And that's why this failure is so confusing. The machine worked, you descaled it, and afterwards it wouldn't reach temperature. But the descale didn't necessarily create the original fault. It may simply have exposed a problem that was already there. One incorrect electrical signal was enough to make the machine believe something that wasn't true. And sometimes, the smallest component makes the most expensive decision. This is BrewFix.